Appreciate you tuning in to this Thursday edition of Birds 365. Your Mac and Mac guys, McMullen and McDonald with you. We've got a guest scheduled to join the show here. A little bit of a different slant on the upcoming season in the National Football League, one from a medical point of view. And with the Eagles' past draft, it's something that we need to know about because the Eagles took some guys who had an injury of history. Our next guest is a sports medicine surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, and also an analyst for the Boston Sports Journal. And she's a good follow on Twitter as well, at Doc Flynn NFL. Dr. Jessica Flynn joins us here on Birds 365. Jody McDonald and John McMullen here. I'm sorry, Doc, I have to do it. What's up, Doc?
Not much. Thanks for having me.
Jessica, yeah, it's great to have you because obviously, and I hope people don't hold it against you because you're in the Boston area. So we are with the Eagles, but you do a great job sort of identifying and NFL injuries and kind of explaining all the information surrounding them. Biggest news here in Philadelphia is Landon Dickerson at number 37 overall. First round talent, significant injury history, tore both his ACLs, left and right. The latest being in the SEC championship game. Also had tightrope surgery in his ankle, which I want you to talk about as well, because Lane Johnson, the all-pro right tackle for the Eagles, also had that last season. Obviously, you don't get to see Landon, so you can only speak in generalities, but when you have a 6'5", 330-pound kid, 2 ACLs, is that going to be a concern moving forward?
It's a really great question, and I think one good piece of news is that it's 2 different ACLs, so it's not 2 ACLs on the same knee. I think that is something that's a little bit more worrisome. So I think that's most likely why it didn't affect his draft stock quite so much. But yeah, I mean, the poor guy, he dealt with a lot of injuries in college. He wasn't healthy all that often. When he was very talented, outstanding center, or lineman. I guess he wasn't always at center, but he had multiple ankle injuries, had that one ankle surgery, and then both ACLs. So I think the soonest thing fans should really think about is the fact that he might not be ready at the beginning of the season because he just had surgery in, I think, December. You want to give him at least 8 months, and a bigger guy, maybe even a little bit more time to recover, let that graft heal, because you don't want him to tear it again. That would be kind of disastrous. But obviously, injury problems for him is something you're going to have to think about. The fact that he's a little bit knock-kneed could certainly have played into his risk for having the ACL tears. And hopefully now that he's getting in with an NFL training staff and really knows his body a little bit better after going through all these injuries, it's something he can turn around in the pros.
All right, Doc, I'm going to have to get a clarification here. I always had my own, and I'm a medical novice at best. Knock-kneed. What is knock-kneed? How would you describe knock-kneed?
Yeah, well, so knock-kneed was the layman term I was trying to use, but
I can't even handle layman's terms. I need help with layman's terms.
So basically, it's when your knees go in a little bit, right? We call it genuvalgum is what we call it, but it's when the knees
whoa. You got to repeat that one.
That was Latin. So yeah, it's when the knees go in a little bit. Some people's legs bow out, that's the opposite, and some people's knees go in. And having knees that go in does put you at increased risk because you're putting more stress on the ACL when you're playing sports.
Jessica, it's interesting to me because the Eagles a couple years ago took a kid in the second round, Sidney Jones, who had tore his Achilles at his pro day. And the theory was, well, he's a cornerback. He is 180 pounds, 185 pounds, whatever he was. It would be a little bit easier to rehab that type of leg injury. Brandon Brooks plays with the Eagles as well. He's torn his Achilles twice in 3 years, basically. Now, he's 6'5", 340. And people are saying he came back really quickly from the first Achilles tear. How much of an effect does that have when you're rehabbing these types of injuries, whether it's Achilles ACL, is it easier for a cornerback than an offensive lineman, or vice versa?
I would say not necessarily. And an Achilles injury recovery is very different than an ACL recovery. So, I mean, you have to think about not just size, but position and the need for quickness. I actually think it's tough for a cornerback to recover from an Achilles because you have to get that quickness back, that ability to go, to just start on a dime and really be able to move and change direction. When you talk about size, I think the biggest concern with ACL tears is really the arthritis that happens in almost every knee that has an ACL tear, whether it's repaired or not. And so that's the bigger concern for a lineman with ACL injury is how quickly is the arthritis going to set in? Is it going to be in the next 5 years, the next 7 years, or is it going to be in the next 15? And the bigger guys are at increased risk of that happening a little bit sooner.
Doc, again, some knowledge for your novice questioner today. Yours truly doesn't understand too many of these medical terms. But I've been following sports for 50 years. And I remember when a guy would hurt his knee, we'd just say, well, he blew out his knee. Now we know ACL, MCL. We've got terms that we can understand it better. Torn pectoral muscle. I still don't understand that. All right, you ripped your muscle. Well, I don't remember any players back in the day when I was a kid growing up, the 70s into the 80s, anybody having torn pectoral muscles. How did we come about to be able to know what that was? What actually is it? And why is it so long? I would think that should be something that should be able to rehab and get back on the field faster, but it takes guys out for entire years. When did we learn about torn pectoral muscles?
Well, we may have learned about it a little bit before you did, but I think you're right. Like it is wild now. And this is sort of how I got into doing this, to talking about sports injuries, is now the average person's going on TV and commenting on sports who has incredible knowledge in football, but maybe less knowledge when it comes to these injuries. And they're discussing these injuries, but they're discussing these injuries in significant detail. So that's when the problem happens, right? Like now we know, like the minute it happened, we have a video of it happening and we have people commenting on it and how long the athlete's going to take to recover, and they haven't even gotten off the field yet, right? So I think it's a great question. Pectoral injuries just take a long time because they're huge muscles, obviously really important, especially for someone like a linebacker who's trying to reach and tackle. So they take a long time to heal. It's a big muscle with a big tendon, and it takes a long time for that to recover.
All right, Jessica, I'm going to follow up on that because I'm going to give you another injury. And I'm sure you know Dr. William Myers. He is the guy. He's in Philadelphia when it comes to the core muscle injury. Now, first, he likes to call it core muscle. It was first called sports hernia. Now, that didn't exist, what Jody was talking about, or it existed. Do we just have a different labeling of it? How does something like that come about? And it seems there's so many more surgeries for core muscle injuries. Why do you think it's gone in that direction?
It is funny how the nomenclature, the wording has changed over the years, even since I've been practicing for the past 15 years. We now understand it's more like a tendonitis, like a chronic tendonitis. So chronic groin, chronic ab tendonitis. It's not a classic hernia like you guys think of, like a big bulge somewhere in your stomach or somewhere. Now we know a little bit more about it. And it's obviously very common because these athletes, what they can do now compared to what they could do 15 years ago is very different. They're quicker, they're stronger. That's why they're tearing their ACLs, because their ACLs are still the same size and their muscles are enormous and they can start and stop on a dime. They're taking big chunks of real estate and trying to make a quick cutting move in that space. And so we're seeing that their soft tissues are getting abused. And that's why you're seeing their core is actually the heart of how they can quickly change direction like that. So that's why you're seeing more of it.
Doc, there are a lot of stages to when a player gets hurt. On the field, they get hurt. Okay, how can you get them back onto the field as quick as possible? First, there's a diagnosis, then there's surgery if necessary, and then maybe the most important part, which is the rehab thereafter. It seems to me teams in the NFL have different thought processes and different ways of handling rehab. Is there a best way to do it? Is it something you have to do on a case-by-case basis, or is there something you've observed in your years working with players that have these on-field type injuries? What's the best way to rehab?
Well, I think there are two parts. There's the physical rehab and the mental rehab, right? So getting the player doesn't just have to heal, they also have to sort of get used to their new normal. And it is very player dependent. It's very position dependent. So you make that call with every athlete. I think what you're alluding to is teams definitely handle things differently. You'll hear, well, this team doc is incredibly conservative, or this team doc, is more comfortable taking risks. You see it in the draft. Certain teams are much more likely to take an injury risk than others. Some teams will fail. I mean, I've heard stories recently about, from GM saying, oh my God, we failed this guy in his medicals, and then he went on to be amazing. And then they took another player at the same position who was an injury disaster and not nearly as, as competitive on the field. So it's just very team dependent what that team medical staff, meaning the training staff and the doctors, are comfortable with.
Jessica, speaking of that, when I talk to NFL teams, it seems like their concerns when it comes to potential draft picks or even players in-house are backs and necks. When they really like to, I hate to use the term red flag, but when they say, okay, there's going to be a potential problem here, and potentially they'll put them down on their draft board or even take them off. Is it because there's so much uncertainty with the back and the neck, as opposed to, say, a torn ACL, Achilles? What you're dealing with?
I do agree with you. I think that is part of it. You just don't know how a certain athlete's going to recover with different disc issues. But you saw Caleb Farley, he fell a little bit because he probably was, if you just looked at skill, the number one cornerback.
Yeah.
He fell a little bit, but he still went in the first round, right? So I do think that's part of it. I think concussions are probably even a little bit more worrisome, just because we can at least get an MRI of the spine. We really can't tell anything from a brain MRI. So I think those are probably the most worrisome, and then spine. And obviously it's position dependent. I'd worry much more in a blocking tight end like Gronk than I would worry in a cornerback, depending, if they had the same injury. Just because that blocking and extension, bigger guy, can lead to sooner issues.
Doc, if you'd be so kind, I'd like to do some role playing with you. It's not going to be anything that'll embarrass either you or I. I'll explain it. I want to play Howie Roseman. You play yourself. And here's the way the conversation goes. I pick up the phone and say, Doc, with the 10th pick in the draft, we just picked Devonta Smith. And the only blowback I'm getting is a lot of people believe at 166 pounds playing in the National Football League, he's an injury waiting to happen. Now, we watched all his tape at Alabama. He never missed any games. He answered the bell every single game. But yet there is this murmur about, he's too small to play in the National Football League. Give me your doctor's perspective. Is it only a matter of time before Devonta Smith gets hurt? Can he avoid this because he's just that skilled and talented and good at doing it? What would you have advised Howie Roseman if he called you and said, I'm thinking about taking this kid at number 10, but I have some worries on it?
Well, the size is obviously a concern. But I guess if you're quick enough to get away from the bigger guy, that's helpful, right? I think one issue that teams, I think the management of teams, maybe the front office, thought, we can just load him up and he'll gain 15 pounds the first season. We'll put him on the field and he'll be fine. And so what I would advise him is, look, we maybe can add a little bit, maybe 5 pounds the first season, but we're not going to see much more than that. So how comfortable are you with him at this weight? Because I don't want you to have this fantasy that we're going to make him bigger, in the short term. And yeah, he's a risk, but it's no more of a risk than any of these other athletes who actually have injury histories. He has a pretty clean slate when it comes to injuries, and he was able to push through and be on the field even if he did have some soft tissue injuries. So I think that is probably equally important, that character, to be able to be out there and proving that he's not injury prone at the college level.
All right. Jessica, and by the way, follow Jessica. It's at Doc Flynn NFL. She does a tremendous job, as you see, giving you all the information about NFL injuries. I have to look this up because Lane Johnson, I mentioned him before. He was on our show. He had a tightrope surgery on his ankle last season, Jessica. He tried to get through the season. He wasn't able to. And then he had what he described as a deltoid repair in his ankle. Could you kind of give us the skinny on both of those surgeries and how much of a concern it is?
Of course. So the tightrope surgery is a surgery that's done to sort of repair the high ankle injury. So a high ankle sprain is when the ligaments that attach your two shin bones together, so above the ankle joint, when they tear. And the tightrope surgery is done to sort of pull those bones together and stabilize them, because a high ankle injury is really, really painful, and it makes the ankle joint unstable and difficult to really do anything on. So a tightrope surgery can get athletes back on the field a little bit sooner, or a lot sooner. So that's done to try to get them. And then if they're not able to get back, the deltoid ligament is actually a different area of the ankle altogether. It's the inner ankle, actually in the ankle joint. It's a big ligament. When someone sprains that ligament, it's a much longer recovery and much more painful than the classic low ankle sprain that you see like on a basketball court. So sometimes it does have to be repaired if the combination of that and the high ankle injury makes the ankle joint really unstable, and it's a longer recovery.
Doc, when you answered the question before about rehab and different ways to handle it and the physical processes compared to the mental process, it gave me pause for thought. And therefore, I want to ask you this question. You have a player that they want you to take a look at. The tests are done, MRI, X-ray, whatever, and you immediately say, all right, this is going to require surgery. So you know after the fact it is going to require rehab to get the player back out on the field. Do you discuss it at length before the surgery, or do you wait till after the surgery? Because some guys, I'm sure, want to know immediately, well, when am I going to be able to start playing again? And others want to wait till the process is done. You're the individual who's going to do the process. How do you determine when you're going to get into greater detail as to how long it's going to take before a player returns to the field?
Jody, that is a very good question. So first, I just want to clarify, I'm not a surgeon. I'm a sports medicine doctor. I do everything except the actual surgery. So I wouldn't be doing the procedure, but I will tell you, I handle it depending on the athlete. And I do, most athletes, they literally do not want to know any of the details, I will say. Most athletes, they don't want to know. They just want to know, when can I start rehabbing and when can I get back on the field? So there's really no putting that off. I do think that's something you start with. And there will be cases, there are cases when the surgeon takes the athlete to the OR and they find something else, or they have to actually take a look in the joint to know for sure how long the recovery is going to be. So you give them a range. But I do think the mental preparation is important right away. And some surgeries, like an ACL tear, actually need some prehab. You want to delay that surgery if you can for a few weeks to get swelling down, to work on range of motion. And so that, of course, is the time that they want to know, well, what am I doing the day after the surgery?
Doc, this is probably out of your purview, but you're a doctor, so I'm going to ask you the question. Justin Fields came out a little bit before the draft that he had epilepsy and he's taking medicine to control it. Didn't fall very far, ended up number 11. When you have to take medicine for something like that, is there a concern? Is there a level? Do you have to kind of figure it out? Would teams look at that and say, we have to at least dive deeper into what's going on here?
I think the main questions will be, would be, how long has he been on the medication? That's something where a lot of people go on the medication and then they sort of outgrow the dose slowly. And if he's been on it for many years, hasn't had any problems with seizures. So that's the main thing. How long have you been on the medication? Have you had any seizures recently? And it sounds like the answer to that was no. So to me, that was not, it was sort of put out there as a very flashy story, which I thought was disappointing because I think it's sort of a non-story and hopefully something that is not a problem for him in his career.
All right, Doc, last one from me. We've done a nice job of balancing here, or I should say you have, actual medical procedures with the mental part of the game and what rehab breaks down to on both sides of the fence. Every once in a while, there is such a tragic injury that you pretty much know it's going to end a individual's career, that it is so large that at their age, rehab is just going to take too much and it's not going to be worth it for that player to be able to come back. Have you ever had to deal with somebody like that, that they asked you to be the bearer of not only bad news, but tragic news that this may very well end their career? If you did, what was that like? How difficult was it?
Yes, I have. A lot of times an injury like that is arthritis. So it's a result of multiple ligament tears in a knee or something like that. And it's finally, look, these are your options, kind of like Dustin Pedroia went through with his knee. You can do this little procedure, it might help. So the athlete tries that, it doesn't work. You can do this bigger procedure, the recovery is going to stink. So they try that, they have a terrible year of recovery, never quite get back to it. And then you get to the point of, okay, the only option at this point is a joint replacement. And that's not conducive with playing in any of these professional leagues. So I have had that discussion with athletes before. And to be honest, most of the athletes know it's coming. Julian Edelman, Patriots wide receiver, he knew this was coming. This is something he's been dealing with for a long time. And it just got to a point where there was nothing else medicine could offer him that would still allow him to play football. And I think, slowly these athletes kind of come to grips with that.
Last one from me, Jessica, on the opposite side of that, when you see a Jalen Smith or a Teddy Bridgewater, I think most notably would be Alex Smith with 17 surgeries, and they get back on the field from these catastrophic injuries. I have a dog too. She's always coming in. Yeah.
Not feeling well, apparently.
Yeah, no worries whatsoever. We kept you too long, so we'll get you back to the dog. But as a doctor, when you see athletes go through what they go through to get back on the field from these really catastrophic injuries, do you say, wow, how far have we come to be able to get these players back on the field from these types of injuries? Because a generation ago, they weren't coming back from these things.
It's incredibly remarkable. Alex Smith's injury, just his whole rehab and how he was able to make it back on the field at a pretty high level. It's incredible. And you're right, we could not have done that 10, 15 years ago. So I think it's not just a testament to where we've come in medicine, but also where we've come with sort of helping these athletes through, giving them hope, giving them support, and kind of sticking with it, because teams could have easily just moved on, from an athlete like that. And I think, it's a remarkable story.
All right, Doc, it won't be a last question. I said I'd give you a last question. It's more of a last statement. Don't know if you do any work or have done any work with any of the Celtic players. Last couple of times the Celtics and the Sixers met in the playoffs has not gone well for Philadelphia. This year it is. So if the Celtics and the Sixers should happen to play, you might want to tell the guys ahead of time, bring the expectations down a little bit, because Philadelphia kind of owes Boston one in that venue.
Okay, I hope the Celtics are healthy for that game. They're having a little bit of a hump right now.
Doc, we appreciate greatly your coming on the show. You taught us something, or at least I did. I had a lot to learn. So thank you for being not only informative, but a teacher as well. We will certainly reach out to you again down the road.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Our pleasure. That is Dr. Jessica Flynn, noted sports doctor, and she writes for the Boston Sports Medical Journal as well. I don't know. I learned something, JM. I don't know about you, but I surely did. I got a lot to learn. So that's
well, we all do. I mean, we have to talk about injuries, and we're not experts. So it's good when you can get an expert on, and because these surgeries, these injuries, they're complicated.
They are, and most times go over my head. That's why we have someone on who knows exactly what she's talking about. So we thank Dr. Jessica Flynn. All right, he is John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. We have the Mac and Mac guys on Birds 365. We'll come back in just a couple. Keep it right here.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.